Good morning. The best laid plans of mice and men. So this morning, I am continuing my series on the life and ministry of Jesus. This is part 2, and I am going through all 4 Gospels at the same time. So it's going to be a long series, but not as long as it could be if I went through them one at a time. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 2. Last week, I talked about the incarnation as we went over John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18, along with some side verses. And then I gave a brief overview of the birth of Christ, which again I'll go over in more detail at Christmas time. Of course, Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day, dedicated at the temple, all the things that the law of Moses says to do for a Jewish baby boy, because he was a good Jew and his parents were good Jews. I want to go ahead and read Matthew 2, 19 to 23. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he departed for the district of Galilee, and came and lived in the city of Nazareth, so that what was spoken through the prophets would be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. So Joseph had gone to Egypt to try and protect Jesus and Mary, because Herod wanted to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem that were 2 years old and younger. This prophecy, he shall be called a Nazarene, I'm an Old Testament scholar, and there's not a specific verse that explicitly says he'll be called a Nazarene. So scholars have been trying to figure out what Matthew meant by that. One of the options is that Nazareth sounds a lot like Nezareth, which is one of the Hebrew words for branch or shoot. And in Isaiah, there's a prophecy that talks about the branch of David, and that's that word Nezareth used in that prophecy. Another option that I recently heard about is that in the first century, at least, Nazareth was a place that was kind of scorned and looked down upon. If I could say this, the ghetto of that area. And so, since there are other prophecies like Isaiah 53 that talk about the Messiah being scorned and looked down upon, Matthew might be referring to this. Matthew being Jewish, I think it's possible he's referring to both. They think that way a lot of times. They have double meanings and they mean both. Now, we don't have a whole lot on the childhood of Jesus from the return to Nazareth until the start of his ministry. There's one incident we're going to look at here in a second. We do know that Joseph is, in the Greek, it's called a tekton, which is often translated as carpenter. It can be used also of stonemasons and other people who use their hands for their crafts. Tom would probably be called a tekton if we spoke Greek. So either way, we know that Jesus grew up using his hands a lot. He was with his stepfather, Joseph, learning the trade. And so he probably would have been a bit bigger and burlier than we see in a lot of our pictures of him, where he's this scrawny little thing walking around in a robe. There are certain documents from the 2nd century AD that try to report some childhood events. I'm not going to recount what they have to say because they're written over 100 years after the fact. And there's other things within those books that are not theologically sound. They're not in our Bible, therefore they're not really that trustworthy. So I'm going to stick with what we have in the Gospels. And with that, I want to look at Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52. It's the one event that we have written in the Gospels about Jesus' childhood. And he's about 12 years old at this point. I can get to it. There it is. So starting in verse 41, and his parents would go to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12 years old, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning, after finishing the days of the feast, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know. But supposing him to be in the caravan, they went a day's journey, and they began searching for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. And it happened that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and his answers. When they saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." And he said to them, "Why is it that you were searching for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand the statement which he had spoken to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjugation to them. And his mother was treasuring all these things in her heart. And Jesus was advancing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. After reading this, I went and asked my mom if there were any stories of me running off. One that she could think of right away was this time I was 4 or 5, somewhere in there. We lived in Kentucky, and she took myself and my sister to this fair up in the mountains, along with my friend Will and his mom. And at some point, she realized I wasn't with her, and she tried not to panic, but she wanted to find me. She's looking around, and she found me at this stall. I guess there was a picture that a kid had drawn on a piece of wood, and I wanted to buy it. It was only a quarter. Of course, she was upset with me, and I shouldn't have run away, that kind of thing that parents normally tell their kids. She did buy the picture for me. I have no idea if I still have it or not. It got lost at some point. I've moved a lot too, so. But the point I want to make here is it's easy to lose a kid in a crowd. And I don't have any kids. I don't know what that feeling is like, but I'm sure some of you do. And some people I've heard say, well, how could they not know Jesus was with them? I mean, weren't they all walking together? Well, families would travel together, and normally it would probably be more than one family from the same village. And as you're traveling along, if someone else kind of meets up with you at the same path, you probably gather together as well, right? There's safety in numbers. And the children, well, they'd all run around and play together while they're walking in the caravan. So why would the parents expect the kid to be right beside them as they're walking along? It's not something that they would have done. But in the evening, when they stopped to rest and have their evening meal, the kids should have gone back to their parents and had their evening meal. Now, Joseph and Mary probably sit down and, well, where's Jesus? Well, let's go talk to Elizabeth and Zechariah, see if he's with them. Well, he's not there. Well, let's go over here and talk with this family or that friend. And eventually they figure out, okay, he's not here. And that's when they go back to Jerusalem. Now, why it took him 3 days to find him at the temple, I don't know. Jerusalem was fairly big at that time. It's just gotten bigger since, obviously. And he says, you should have known I was here in my father's house. But it didn't make sense to them because, well, Joseph is the stepfather, and I don't think Joseph was working on the temple at that point. Maybe it could have been. I need to look and see if Herod was still building it at that point in time. I'm pretty sure it was completed. That's probably why they didn't quite understand. I want to point out that the crowds were really astonished at Jesus' questions and understanding of the scriptures. I imagine then, granted, he's 12 years old, but so he's not asking things like, how many stones did David grab to kill Goliath, or why didn't anybody else? Well, he may have asked that one, but things like, why is the sky blue, or something silly like that. He's asking deep and hard questions, probably about the Mosaic Law, would be my guess. And we know from other readings later in Jesus' life that he's very good at asking questions. He answers questions by asking questions. And at some point, they ask questions to trap him a lot, and at some point when they do that, he asks them a question, and then they never ask him a question like that again because they don't want to get, they don't want to look like fools anymore. I think this shows his understanding of what he needs to do at a very young age. Now Mary asks, "Child, why have you treated us this way?" Any parent, of course, would have been worried sick about their kid wandering off. And he was probably told when they were going to leave. I imagine they may have met other families at a place, and he may have played with the kids, and then as they left, he probably stayed behind and went and did whatever he needed to do. In his response, like I said a little bit ago, he needs to be in his father's house about his father's business. That's why he didn't run off. He had something more important to do. And unlike what I thought was important about getting this picture, he actually had something really important to be doing, sitting there with the rabbis and learning. I want to fast forward a little bit to Luke chapter 3. verses 10 to 14. As I mentioned last week, I'm not going to talk about John the Baptist very much because Jared did that and we're focusing in on Jesus. But I want you to read what John said in some of his preaching. So chapter 3, verse 10, "And the crowds were questioning him, saying, 'Then what should we do?' And he would answer and say to them, 'The man who has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none, and he who has food is to do likewise.' And tax collectors also came to be baptized, and they said to him, 'Teacher, what should we do?' And he said to them, 'Collect no more than what you have been ordered to.' And soldiers were also questioning him, saying, 'What should we also do?' And he said to them, 'Do not take money from anyone by force, or extort anyone, and be content with your wages.'" These sound a lot like I've read recently in James and 1 John, and there's other places in the New Testament and the Old Testament that talk about these kinds of things. It sounds a lot like loving your neighbor as yourself. You know, if you have more than you need, God has blessed you, and you should take it and give to those who don't have it, so you can bless them, and God can bless them through you. And with the tax collectors and the soldiers, you know, as a tax collector, if Rome said, okay, if they make this much, then take 10 shekels for their tax. The tax collector could say, oh, you owe 15 shekels. And they would keep the 5, give the 10 to Rome, and then Rome would give them, 1 or 2 of the 10 as payment for services rendered. So they were stealing from people. The soldiers, based on what John says here, John the Baptizer, I would assume they probably go around and say, give me money or else, or maybe like some cops do in some movies and TV shows, you know, hey, we'll protect you if you give us a little bit of your revenue every month, right? And so he's telling them, don't do that either, that's wrong. And then Jesus ends up coming to be baptized by him. Keep your finger in Luke, because we'll look at verse 23 of chapter 3 here in a second. But I want to look at Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 13. Really thin pages in the Bible. Okay, Mark 1, verse 9. "Now it happened that in those days Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And a voice came out of the heavens, 'You are my beloved Son, and you I am well pleased.' And immediately the Spirit drove him to go out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild beasts, and the angels were ministering to him." Back over to Luke 3:23. "When he began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age." And I'll stop there because Luke goes into the genealogy of Jesus following Mary's line. So I think the Spirit descending upon him and the voice from heaven are not for his benefit, but the people around him, to see how important he is and who he is. Also, what the voice said, "You are my Son, and you I am well pleased," that's actually a fulfillment of Psalm chapter 2, verse 7, which I just saw yesterday, where we have Yahweh saying to his anointed one, "You are my Son, and you I am well pleased." Now, the Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness. And we know he's there for 40 days and nights, and he's fasting. Matthew says he was hungry, which that's kind of Matthew would be after 40 days too. The number 40, of course, is very important in the Bible. This particular number, I think, is connecting to the 40 years of wandering that the Israelites did in the wilderness. You know, when they came up to the Promised Land and they sent 12 spies into it, 10 of them came back and said, oh, they're giants, we're like grasshoppers, they're going to squash us, we need to just stay away. 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, no, we got this, God is with us, we should go do it. They followed the 10, and that's why God said, okay, you're going to wander for 40 years, and this generation is going to die, but your kids are going to go into the land. I think it's interesting to note, too, that Moses and Elijah both fasted for 40 days also. We could look at their independent fast at another time. But what the Spirit's doing here, he's not punishing Jesus, and he's not disciplining him in the sense of he did something wrong. Jesus was sinless, after all, and he just got baptized. Now, he's here to get tested and tempted. I want to look at Matthew chapter 4 because he gives us some more information on the temptation. Luke also gives us more information, slightly different order that Matthew gives us. I want to take a look at Matthew, starting in verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he became hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." But he, Jesus, answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." Then the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. Luke adds one little detail. The devil in Luke says that all the kingdoms are his. They've been given to him, and he can give them to whomever he chooses. I want to read the passages that were just quoted by Jesus and the devil in the order they were quoted. Jesus starts off in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. And then he goes to Deuteronomy 6 later, so if you want to keep your finger there when we flip to what the devil quoted. So Deuteronomy 8, 3. "And he humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh." So part of the wandering, that the Israelites got hungry, they didn't have a lot of food with them, or any, maybe at this point they might have run out. And so they go to Moses and they're saying, "Hey, we're hungry, we need some food." And Moses prays to God. The manna, it's that white stuff that came down from heaven, and it kind of looked like a dew on the ground in the morning. And manna literally means, "What is it?" because they weren't sure what it was. God had commanded them every morning, go out and collect only what you need for your household for the day. On the sixth day, collect twice as much because there's not going to be any on the seventh day. Even then, some Israelites would go out and collect more than they needed, and the next day it would be rotten. Or some Israelites on the sixth day, they'd only collect what they needed for that day, expecting there to be more the next, and they'd go out and there wasn't any. There was always enough, though, for those who did what God told them to do to get what they needed to eat. So even the greedy ones didn't take away from the needy ones. Now keep your finger there, because we'll go back to Deuteronomy 6, but flip over to Psalm 91 that the devil is quoting. Now, I don't necessarily think he's quoting it out of context, but it is a poetic passage, and it is something that he applies incorrectly. Psalm 91, and I am going to read the whole thing. "He who abides in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the destructive pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will take refuge. His truth is a large shield and a bulwark. You will not be afraid of terror by night, or arrows that fly by day, of pestilence that moves in darkness, or of destruction that devastates at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made Yahweh, my refuge the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil will befall you, and no plague will come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will tread upon the fierce lion and cobra, the young lion and the serpent you will trample down. Because he has loved me, therefore I will protect him. I will set him securely on high, because he has known my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in his distress, and I will rescue him and honor him. With a long life I will satisfy him, and I will show him my salvation. That last little bit there is God talking to the psalmist, the one who abides in him. I think it's interesting. Satan quotes, "Lest you strike your foot against a stone," and the next verse says, "You will tread upon the fierce lion and the cobra." That reminds me of Genesis chapter 3, where God tells the serpent, "You will bite his heel, but he will crush your head." So he knows this, but he's not connecting the dots, apparently. And I kind of have to wonder if he knows who he's tempting. I would think he would, but maybe he's not paying attention. And of course, in response, Jesus quotes Deuteronomy 6:16. "You shall not put Yahweh your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah." Massah is where the Israelites cried out for water, and God told Moses to take his staff and strike the rock, and it would give them water. So that's where they were testing him, crying out. And actually, we're going to read verses 13 to 15 because Jesus quotes that next. "Yahweh your God you shall fear, and him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not walk after other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who surround you. For Yahweh your God for Yahweh your God in the midst of you is a jealous God, lest the anger of Yahweh your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from the face of the earth." So I imagine that when the devil said, "Hey, look, all this stuff is mine and I can give it to you," that's when Jesus got pretty angry with him. And when he said, "Get away and serve only Yahweh your God." And I just mentioned that I wonder if he knows who he's tempting, because really all this belongs to Jesus. It all belongs to God. Matter of fact, that Psalm 2 I mentioned a little bit ago in verse 8, Yahweh is telling his anointed one, whom he just called his son, "If you ask me, I will give you the nations." So he already has them. And that's something that I saw yesterday. I was listening to Dr. James White speak at Redemption Hills Church over there in Littleton. So thank you to him if he ever ends up seeing this. But that just makes it clear to me that there's two choices, right? The devil is allowed to have some control over this world for right now. Paul calls him the prince of the air. But really the one who has control is Jesus. It's kind of like this last Wednesday, I was talking to my friend Josh, and the Lord of the Rings came up. And well, in The Return of the King, which these have been out for a long time, and the movies have too, so if I'm ruining something, I'm sorry, but you've had plenty of time. You've got Denethor, who is currently in control of the city of Gondor, but he's a steward. He is not the king. He's doing a very bad job of being a steward too. The devil, of course, is doing a bad job on purpose. Whether Denethor was doing it on purpose or not, I don't know. He was just not a good steward, not a good father, not a good person. And then you have Aragorn, who is the rightful king, and eventually he does come and take over. And so, that's like Jesus. I imagine him looking at the devil like, "All yours? Really? You sure?" And then tells him to go away. And then eventually, he takes it over, but that's for later in my series. I don't want to get too far ahead. I do want to look at Hebrews chapter 4 real quick, because some of you might be wondering, well, okay, Jesus was tempted, but can he really know the temptations that I've gone through? Can he really understand these things that I'm dealing with? Now, I'm sure none of you have probably had to deal with the 3 temptations that Jesus had. Maybe to a certain level, an amount of authority and power, but not actually being able to turn stones into bread or jumping from a high place. At least I hope not jumping from a high place. That'd be a scary idea. But in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 16, it says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us take hold of our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things like we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Jesus was victorious over the temptations that the devil threw at him. Temptations that in some way are connected to what Israel went through during that 40 years of wandering, and they failed. Jesus is also tempted with the idea of having this authority and this power, which Adam and Eve were tempted with. You will be like gods. They failed. He already had the authority, but he still succeeded in not taking it back up. If you remember last week, I read from Philippians, where he had the very form of God, but he considered equality with God not to be something to hold on to. He's laid that aside for the ministry that he has. You know, the Israelites, they begged for food, they begged for water. They had the golden calf at Mount Sinai, I've talked about before. If you're not familiar with that, feel free to come up and ask me about it. And we have these temptations too, wondering, where will our next meal come from? What about the money to pay my bills? Or, you know, it's going to be keep the lights on, or put food on the table, keep the house, or keep the car, or put the kids in a good school, that kind of thing. But he understands what we're going through. You know, he had people that he wept for. He had no roof, no permanent roof to go over his head. He had to rely on his disciples, family and friends, or anyone in a town where they were all strangers. He had to rely on someone to take them in for the night. Maybe they slept in the town square for a while, who knows? He ate, he drank, he slept. People misunderstood him. At one point, a large crowd of people actually walk away from him because his teaching is too hard. And we'll look at that eventually in this series. Another group tried to grab him and throw him off a cliff, and he just got to pass through them. How that happened, I'm not sure. And of course, at the end, the leaders decided to crucify him. So he knows what this human life can be like, how hard it can be. And I want you to know he's right there beside you, going through whatever it is you're going through with you. He may not pull you out of it. He may have a reason for you to go through it, but he's right there to help you. So you can, if you need to, put your arm around him and hobble along getting through it again. And he'll heal you afterwards. It takes time. Healing always takes time, but it's always worth it. There's a reason. There's something to learn, a maturity to gain, something along those lines. And these temptations just show us a taste of some things that he went through. And so with that, I'll leave Jenny some time if she's here. And she's not here? Okay. I'll say a quick prayer then, and we'll do our last song and go from there. Father, thank you. Thank you that we still live in a time and place where we can come and worship you and learn about you. Thank you for the freedom that we have in this great country. Be with us as we get ready to celebrate the anniversary of our freedom and our patriotism. Please keep us all safe as we do so. And may we bring others in so that we can feed them with the food that you have blessed us with. And if need be, we can clothe them with the clothes you've given us. Help us to glorify and honor you. Help us to know that you are right there with us through our temptations and our trials and our hard times. And please be with us as we get ready to leave this place. Keep us safe on the roads until we meet again. It's in your Son's name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.